to put suggestions past him. You put it on the group. I think it should be Thursday night. What do you think? Why? Is it? Oh, it's good that you point it out. Moishi, we're using Betzal's internet because yours is not working.
Terrible. What about the extension from Beis?
I don't know. It's taking a long time. It's getting late. It's getting very, very late. Okay.
Right.
We have to. I want to start again with the big master was online. Are
you talking about England won or what?
The master is the more important.
Oh, I see. Right.
Okay. We're up to Ein Testament Aleph, 6 or 7 lines from the top. New topic. Mishnah says that the first eats on Yom Kippur Kiseves Agasa, big date. Oma Vovas of Rabbi, Oma of Yehuda. Kiseves Agasa Sha'amu, Yeseva Mikabeitza. A date is bigger than an egg. An egg, by the way, is either double a kazais or 1/3 bigger. It's a shaila, kazais is smaller as an egg. So kazais is either a third or half an egg. So egg is much bigger than a kazais. And when we talk about achila normally, what do we normally talk about? Kazais. And on Pesach, for example, it says you have to eat matzahs, we eat kazais. A kazais is almost double. It is double. And the kiseves on Yom Kippur is even bigger than that. And so the computer's messing around. So it's bigger than that, and therefore, so the obvious question is, why Kiseves is pretty much smaller? This is how much a person needs to calm his mind. Less than that does not calm the mind. Meaning like this. The Torah says, Tanu should afflict itself. The Torah doesn't say, don't eat on Yom Kippur. The Torah never says the words, don't eat on Yom Kippur. The only words the Torah uses is Tanu. The Torah says Nisim Stav Shesechem, Tanu Stav Shesechem. In fact, the Torah says in 5 different psukim that it's a day of affliction. When a person that hasn't eaten a kiseves, he's still afflicted. Until a person's eaten a proper amount of kiseves, I saw a biography of a god, not so well known, but now I've got his name. I saw that they had stories that was Tivei Chochma, very sweet. One of the things they had, a couple ones came to him, fighting a very, very, very lot. So he said to the wife, she should stop dieting. And I said in the Shiur, I just saw the story very recently. I was very impressed. What happened was, Taki should stop dieting. I'm not telling you this as advice. So he said, stop dieting. And a few months later, the husband came back to say things are much, much better. So I asked him, where did you get it from? So you know what he said? He said, he got it from Yoma. Yoma says that if you don't eat, your mind is not settled. And he could sense by her a certain stress. So to stop dieting, a person has to sometimes eat a coffee to be asked for diet. Then afterwards you can think it's an interesting story.
English is called hungry.
Hungry, oh very good. Well, with A-N-G.
Yeah, because you're hungry. As kids, they're really hungry.
So God says that until you've eaten the kiseves, God says until you've eaten the kiseves, you're still irritable, you're still being very more meisri. What we say, we're going to be learning sukkah soon, so this is an introduction to sukkah. Meisri was a story. They brought him to Rabbi Yehuda to taste the food, the Gamliel, and they gave him Gamliel Shteker always 2 dates with Glisha Mar in a bucket of water. But on one they said, hold him in the sukkah, let's eat it in the sukkah. So they got to taste something, 2 dates and some water. And they said, let's go eat in the sukkah. But Tony Alo, that's not the halacha. They want to be machme on themselves. They want to be machme on themselves. So it clearly says over here that 2 dates is not enough to require you to eat in the sukkah. In the Havamid of the Gemara did not differentiate between fruit and bread. The Gemara did not differentiate. So the Gemara understood that even bread, that would be the same halacha. Now, if you hold that a date is more than an egg, so 2 dates is a very, very lot more than an egg. So it would be arrived from this Mishnah that to eat in the sukkah one's not required unless one eats a very big meal. Because you have to get into the whole logic of the ideas behind it. It says that the Gamliel got 2 dates and he went to eat it in the sukkah because he wanted to be machmir. Mashmat, can infer, that halachically he didn't need to. Why didn't he need to? Oh, it's 2 dates. Answer, it's a very small meal, 2 dates. Now, Rava just told us that a date is bigger than an egg. So 2 dates is bigger than 2 eggs. And Afa PK, you don't eat it in the sukkah. Is a vaya, they don't eat it in the sukkah for such a thing. And now I've got another Mishnah. They gave up tzaddik to eat. He did 3 colors. He made sure to eat less than kabetza because he didn't want to eat in the sukkah. Not lebamapo. He held it with a cloth. He did not wash. He did not want to wash because he held that less than the kabetza. You don't need to wash. He ate out of the sukkah. He didn't make a bracha. 3 things he did. Didn't make a bracha. He didn't bench. He ate it out of the sukkah and he ate it with a cloth. The Rishonim will explain that he held that you don't need to wash your hands. So why did he hold it with a cloth? If you don't need to wash your hands, why did he hold it with a cloth? So Rashi says a number of places just because he wants to keep clean. It was nothing to do with halacha. It was a cleanliness issue. He hadn't washed his hands were dirty, so therefore that's why. Tesis mentions that he was a kohen. Since he was a kohen actually has extra machlim to move a towel. But Tzaddik did 3 things. He ate less than the kabeitz, he didn't bench. By the way, Tesis of this bottom Tesis is quite a long one. Goes quite a bit over, it goes in over the page. We're going to see this machlokes of men of Yehuda, how much you have to eat to be chayav to bench. Anybody remember the machlokes of Yehuda? What's the machlokes of Yehuda? Kabeitza or kazatz. Now, from a tzaddik, what does he pass come? Kabeitza. And Tesis passed the halacha l'maisa that you have to bench by a kazatz, not like a tzaddik. So we don't pass like a tzaddik. But one thing we see clearly, that when tzaddik ate less than kabeitza. Why? Because he didn't want to eat it in the sukkah. When we're talking about Testament Beis, kabeitza by sukkah. A kabeitza needs a sukkah. That means we can medag that if a person eats a beitza of bread, he needs to eat in the sukkah. Now, the Gemara has to add one more aspect. We mentioned already that when a date, in order, the date of our Mishnah is with its pip or without its pip? It's with. It's the volume of with the pip. And there, obviously, when they were given 2 dates to eat, they were not going to eat it with a pip, they were going to do it without. So the Gemara now explains like this. If you say that the keseves, a big keseves is more than a beitza, the 2 dates which Gamliel got were not the size of a beitza. How do we know they're not the size of a beitza? Because he ate it outside the sukkah. He wanted to eat it outside the sukkah was a kabeitza, because with tzaddik only ate less than a kabeitza. No, that's with tzaddik. With tzaddik is a separate story. Tzaddik ate less kabeitza. Gamliel got 2 dates. So the fact that Gamliel ate 2 dates out of the sukkah is about that 2 dates together is less. So he asks if 2 dates together without the pip, because never ate the pip, could that be more than the beitza? It doesn't make sense. So the Gemara works out like this. Let's get the cheshbon clear. Rava says that our Mishnah talks about 1 date, but a date with a pip that's more than a beitza. How much would you say approximately in CC is a beitza nowadays? How much is a beitza? Once discussed this. So yeah, 50 or 55. Most people say 50, some say 55. We'll stick to 50. They used to be bigger and they got smaller. That means they used to be, yeah. The volume of an egg is 50 cc. So according to Rabbi, the volume of a date, which is actually quite hard to imagine, must have big dates in these days, is more than that. Says the Gemara, that can't be. Why? Because Gamliel ate 2 dates. That we agree that he ate them without the pip. But if he ate 2 dates and together 2 dates without the pip were not a kabeitza, it can't be usually a pip. The Gemara understands and have him in there is like a 5th or a 10th of the fruit, right? So if you take off, let's say, a 5th of the fruit for the pip, so you take 2 dates, take off a 5th each for the fruit, you still got 1.8 of the dates left. And that together, and that did not come to a beitza. And Rava holds that 1 to keseves with a pip is more than a beitza. That doesn't work. And indeed, 2 dates without the pips, not kabeitza, keseves agas garinosa, have a yesem kabeitza. That means the pip is larger than the date. There's more date is taken up with the pip than the actual, what we call the meat or the flesh of the fruit. And therefore, you take up 60% each of the dates. Now you've only got 2 dates together without the pip. It's only 80% of a date. So that's less than the kabeitza. People used to say, if you've got 2 kab, which is a measure of dates, you've got more than a kab of pips. And these people would get very frustrated. You go to the shop, you buy dates, and you come home and you find that most of what you've bought is pips. and they would say you buy 2 kav of dates, and you end up with more than a kav of pips. So you see the Maisa that they take up more than 50%. So that answers it. Fruit do not require sukkah. There's machlokes with the passing like the Rambam Rosh do, the Rif does not. Therefore, the Rif held that if you ate fruit on sukkahs, you have to eat them inside the sukkah. The Rif holds like that. The Rambam Rosh argue, we pass like the Rambam Rosh. That's why if you eat an apple or 2, you don't eat it in the sukkah. Now, I just want to say that Derech Agag is important to remember. The Rav over here makes a big chiddush that you misunderstood the previous Gemara. So I want to go through the Gemara again briefly to understand. Well, just the highlights. When Gamliel was given 2 dates, and he ate it in the sukkah. And the Mishnah tells us, not because he had to, we want to be machmir. So from there we see that 2 dates do not require sukkah. Before Rava came along, we do not differentiate between dates and bread. We know that a kibetza of bread is required to be in the sukkah, right? We know that. How do we know that? From a tzaddik created less than the kibetza of bread outside the sukkah, the kibetza of bread ate in the sukkah. So we know that an egg of bread you do need to. 2 dates we don't need to. Says the Gemara, let's now analyze what Rava told us. Rava told us what? That a date is more than a kibetza. Says, well, it doesn't work. Why? Because Gamliel ate 2 dates outside this, inside the sukkah because we want to be machmir. And we said that so a kibetza, you do need to eat in the sukkah. It's about that 2 dates together come to less than the kibetza. So how can Rava say that 1 date by itself is more than the kibetza? Well, the Gemara answers, the first answer is that Gamliel ate it without the pips. And therefore, when you take away the pip, you're left with less than half of the date left. So therefore, you've only got 40, 50, 45% left of the date. So the 2 together don't come to a betza. But if you were to have 1 date with the pip, it would be more than the kibetza. That is one answer that the Gemara gives. Yes, that's like this. That's when it comes to Yom Kippur, comes to Yom Kippur, we try to measure how much you have to eat. The Torah says, the Mishnah says, like a date with its pip. So you evaluate the volume of that. Rava told us the volume of a date with a pip is more than an egg. And that the Gemara and the Hamanah said that doesn't make any sense because you've got 2 dates together, don't come to 1 egg. 1 date by itself should be more than an egg. And the Gemara answers the difference is whether you've got the pips or not. When you've got the pips, 1 date with it is already more than an egg. Without it, then even 2 don't reach an egg. That's the Gemara's first answer. The Gemara's second answer is Rava's answer. That Gamliel with 2 dates is much, much more than a kibetza. It's much more than a kibetza. So why was Gamliel machmir when he ate it inside the sukkah? He had to, it's more than a kibetza. Answer because he was eating fruit, not bread. What do you want to say?
How long will it take Gamliel to eat these dates?
If you ate it very, very slowly, if it's only nibbling at them.
So it's not volume, it's the fact that
you do so slowly. The Mishnah doesn't mention that. I hear, what would happen if you eat it slowly, then it would be different. I hear. Why does the Gemara not just check how big a date? It could be because the Gemara has changed. So we see like the eggs has changed. Okay. Says the Gemara. Meisvei, we asked the catch on Rava. Rava came along with a very big chiddush. What was the chiddush of Rava? What's the main chiddush of Rava, by the way? You don't need to eat fruit in the sukkah. Let's get that chiddush of Rava. As I mentioned, the Ram and the Rosh basket like Rava, and every child comes home from school knowing Rava, that you can eat fruit as much as you want outside the sukkah. But the Rif Beis is a chiddush. Okay, Meisvei. Obey Rabbi. Kishinu l'mei b'terei surah b'los ben Shamua. When learned by b'los ben Shamua, if you look for the Einu Va'anovim got figs and grapes, v'chalnu achilas avai chutz l'sukkah. We ate it achilas avai like you want to be all nibbling at them. We weren't eating them properly, like you said, and ate them outside the sukkah. Says the Gemara, achilas avai and achilas kevaloi. Had they sat down to eat a proper bowl of fruit in a proper speed of thing, then they would have to eat in the sukkah. That's the deal, because it says they ate it temporarily, like outside the sukkah, but achilas keva would be within the sukkah. Not like Rava. Rava told us that food do not require a sukkah. The more gives 2 answers. Fruit is always achilas arai. So we ate it as if it was achilas arai outside the sukkah. That we ate bread in achilas arai, not in a fixed meal, and fruit in a fixed meal. together we ate them all outside the sukkah because you don't have to have you don't eat it in the sukkah. Oh, so like he was saying until the eat it nibbling a stiff bit of bread. That's even bread. That's right. Leaving aside the fichoch. The halacha is that a person is how many times is he mechuyev to eat in the sukkah over sukkah? Does anybody know? How much? Rabbi Lezer says 14, but we pass more. You only have to eat one meal in the sukkah. The rest of the sukkahs, if you eat potatoes or apples, the rest of the sukkahs, so you eat in the sukkah. Rabbi Lezer says you have to have 14 meals because it says it's part of living there. So now, what happens if one day you miss the meal? So what's Rabbi Lezer says? Next day you have to have more meals. If you have kinds of compote, things like that, you're yoitza. Now, the more that have been understood, that let's go says it's a why talk about compote, which is like porridge and things like that? Talk about fruit and say that you can be mashlim with fruit is a right to rather that what? That fruit wouldn't be eaten in the sukkah. Says, well, no, my minitagima pears, minitagima could be pears. The place where there's no fruit, since there's no fruit, therefore you have to eat tagima to fulfill the meal. So the Maisa, we don't pass like a blaze anyway, that you don't need to have 14 meals, but if you do it, it's a shaila whether you can fill it with fruit, and it depends according to Rabbi whether fruit needs a sukkah or not. Okay. But Zvid argues, before we had Rabbi saying that a date is bigger than an egg. Zvid argues, is less than an egg. It's less than an egg. Now, nowhere does it say how much less than the egg. Nowhere does it say. And it makes a huge nafkamina. Why does it make a huge nafkamina? I'll tell you why. Unfortunately, some people do need to eat a Yom Kippur, right? So we always say to them, eat Shiur. So how much is Shiur? Shiur is less than the date. So we just said that we assume that an egg is about 50 cc. That's as most posts can say. So if someone says less, let's say how much less would you say? If you say 20%, that's 40. And if you eat 40, then you've already been over what is eating on eating a proper shiur. So if you want to give somebody shiur, go to a trolley you're taken, he'll give you a measure in a cup, which they have these special measuring cups, and less than 40, which would be, let's say 35, and they say to it, eat it to less achilas pas, which is 9 minutes. But the problem is, maybe he's wrong, maybe it's less than 40, maybe it's only 30, and if it's only 30, you have to get 25. And it's very interesting that I saw Mishnah and others say that since it didn't say how much, you can be makel. And if it's already, let's say, 45, that's already not Kesevas Agasa. Why is it not Kesevas Agasa? Because Kesevas Agasa is less than an egg. Even a mashu less than an egg. So 50 eggs, 50. So Kesevas Agasa is 48. So if you already have 45 or 40, you're definitely less than the date. And if you look at the measurements of many of the person of seeds, some have 40, some have 45. Why? Because they said egg is 50. Kesevas Agasa is less than that. Anything less than that is already Kesevas Agasos. Therefore, anything even twice less than that is okay. So again, Ditnan. Now, Zud has to prove it. We pass like Zud, not like Bob in this case. Like Kesevas Agasos is less than it. That's that. Because I chametz b'kesevas. On Pesach not allowed to eat chametz. There's two kinds of chametz: normal chametz and soy, which is kind of yeast that makes other things chametz. Besides from not eating, how much chametz you're not allowed to eat? It's already kazais. Everybody agrees it's kazais. That's the normal amount not allowed to eat. Besides the issue of eating, you're not allowed to own chametz. Now here the Torah says you're not allowed to own chametz, not allowed to own soy. The most going to explain that the Torah does not need to tell us both. Why not? If the Torah told me not to own chametz, I would have already worked out that I mustn't have soy. How would that work out? No, because soy is much worse than the chametz. If already the Torah says don't have chametz, kavachim is soy. Soy makes things into chametz. So therefore, soy is even worse than chametz. If the Torah said we don't eat chametz, I already know don't eat soy. Different measurements. Each one has a different halachic measurement, and that's what the Torah has to tell us about. That's inside. If a person owns a soy bekazais, is chayav. Chametz b'kesevas, chametz is more kesevas. Now, we asked, "My tamed of Shammai, what's the logic of Shammai?" And the more answered, Nichtevach when the chametz. The Torah should have write don't own the chametz. I would not need to tell me about soy. But no, I mean I would say, Uma chametz in chimutze kosher. If chametz, which doesn't make other things chametz, also because I so chimutze kosher de koshki. With the pagidu achmona, since the Torah split it and told us both, lived it off shiur shazeh because shiur shazeh. So because I chametz v'kiseves. Again, if the Torah would have wanted me to note that the issa of having chametz is the same, the Torah would have just said to me, don't own chametz. And now that it worked out, I'm not allowed to own so'oy. Since the Torah says both, what the Torah tried to say to the so'oy, which is worse than chametz, you mustn't own even less than chametz. Chametz, which is only normal chametz, you're only allowed to own this much. So'oy, which is worse, even less than that is awesome. If you say that the keseves is more than an egg, mechti b'shamai ashur d'nofish b'gzayis kamhadi, listen to kebeitza, they should say kebeitza. If you hold that it goes kazayis and olive, then an egg, then a date, which is what Rava told us previously on Amud Aleph. So when the Torah says one measure for chametz, one measure for so'oy, and we know that the measure for chametz has to be bigger than the measure for so'oy, and we know that by so'oy it's a kazayis, so how much bigger by chametz would you go? You'd go up to the next measure. What's the next measure? Like a veitza. And what do Beis Shammai go to? They go to a keseves. Is a vaya that keseves must be smaller than a kebeitza. And yeah, it's even more than that. Even if they're similar, nisli kebeitza, you should talk about the common measure, which is an egg. And allow shvaminok keseves pechusa b'kebeitza. That a date is smaller than the kebeitza. And since the date is smaller than the kebeitza, the Torah says don't have chametz, don't have so'oy. And I already know that from the so'oy, from chametz I already know so'oy. The answer is so'oy is because chametz is because that's the next share up, that's the next size up. Says the more, no, mimai, can argue. Dilma lola mei keseves agasa shamu yisemu kebeitza. Hostoma kebeitza. Our Mishnah talked about a large date. Beis Shammai were talking about the average size date. The average size date is smaller. So really you could have like this. You've got Gazayis is the smallest, then an average size date, then an egg, then a big date. And Rava came along on Amud Aleph and told us that on Yom Kippur you only chayav if you eat like a large date. And he said a large date is bigger than an egg. So we asked the kasha that if Beis Shammai were going to say that the chametz is a bigger measure, they should go for the next size up. And the next size up is bigger, is a beit and not a kiseves. Answer is, well, you're mixing up two different terms over here. There's a normal date and there's a large date. A normal date is smaller than an egg. A large date is bigger than an egg. And Rava was talking about a large date, which is our Mishnah is talking about, and Beis Shammai will talk about a small date. Again, a big date that we said is semi kabetza or stomach kabetza is like a kabetza. The Gemara adds, maybe even if they're the same, the Gemara Beis Shammai just shows one. So you've got no proof. That means, again, according to Rava, a large date is bigger than an egg. According to Rabbi, a large date is smaller than an egg. Says the we try to figure out for Beis Shammai because they go to the next size up and they go to a date. According to Rava, they should have gone to a kabetza. And says, well, no, according to Rava, they would have gone up to a small date, not a big date. Elamach, at kama mezamnim, how much do you have to do a zimun to bench? At kazai sivra me avyudim at kabetza. What's the argument? You should drink. Always, whenever the Torah says eating, is always a kazais. Eating which has satisfaction. If you say that keseves agasa is bigger than the kabetza, does it not calm a person down? And allow keseves agasa shamu pochus kabetza. Kabetza b'saba b'keseves miasva date. The Gemara says a very, very beautiful piece of logic. The Torah says v'chalta v'savata v'rachta. The Gemara's got two explanations what that means. One is v'mer, v'chalta you should eat. V'savata you should drink, or v'rachta. By the way, the Shavuot and many other Kavcham say that a person should not bench when they're thirsty. Because let's say you've eaten the whole meal, and suddenly you never go around to getting a drink, you can't bother having a drink, have a drink later. You want to bench ready, in a rush, so you bench. Later you find yourself, you'll get a drink. No. In fact, there's a famous Kiva who talks about somebody who ate, and then he benched, he was still thirsty, and then he drank, doesn't need to bench again. because now he's fulfilled the savot of the chalta. Okay, that is from Meir Shitta. The Rabbi Yehuda holds v'chalta v'savot achila sheish not like Meir. Eating which satisfies. Eating which satisfies, not a kazayis, is how much? Is a kibetz. Now we know that on Yom Kippur, the Torah says you should afflict yourself. There are two stages when a person is very, very hungry. What's the two stages? One eats a bit, not satisfied, but he's no longer afflicted. And later eats even more, he becomes satisfied. That is how it always goes, right? You eat something, takes away the pangs of hunger, and afterwards you're not satisfied until you eat much more. Now Rabbi Yehuda says that satisfaction comes when you eat a kibetza. Now our Mishnah says that by eating a date, you're already no longer afflicted because you're already a bit more calm. You've had something to eat. So again, so over here comes out, says the Gemara, it can't be that a date is bigger than an egg. Because if a date is bigger than an egg, the logic doesn't work possible. It's impossible. So you just said that you're satisfied after you eat an egg, but you're not afflicted after you eat a big date, which is more than an egg. That doesn't make sense. First, you have the smaller measure, which is that you're no longer afflicted, which is eating a big date. And then afterwards, you get to the satisfaction, which is an egg. So therefore, from here is a proof that a big date is enough to make you not afflicted anymore. That means you're not in pain from the hunger when you've eaten a date. But to be fully satisfied, you have to eat an egg. And that's the two stages. And that's how we pass on. Okay. Nice, we're going to have a lot more regarding this point, but it's important to remember, therefore. On Yom Kippur, the Torah doesn't say don't eat. The Torah says afflict yourself. As long as a person is still under affliction, so he's keeping the mitzvah. The minute he eats enough that he's not afflicted anymore, then he's no longer kept the mitzvah of Tanus Nafshus. Oh, we're going to discuss that later. So, okay, let's ask what Torah is saying. I want to prove this point. It's an interesting way to think about it. Let's say somebody like Oig Melech HaBosher, right? Regarding satisfaction, that would be clear that his satisfaction, and let's say my satisfaction, will not be the same. Regarding affliction, one could argue, because affliction is not satisfaction. Regarding satisfaction, you could say he's not really satisfied unless he's eaten thing. But the amount to take away inui, that could be the same, because inui is to do with the fact that you've had nothing to eat. Eat something already not afflicted. So it could be that already that regarding affliction, me and Rabbi would come to the same measure. Do you hear that piece of logic? If not, that is Nakud over here. Achila is sphere, the sphere, and that's why the Gemara proves that a date must be less than the kabetza, because the kabetza is sphere, and the date is less. Okay. Tanya Rabbi, a new topic. I want to do a bit more because go like. Whenever the Torah says eating, top line of Peyam and Aleph, it's always a kazayis. The pasuk uses a different expression, and the Chachamim changed the Shiur, meaning for something to spread tumah, it has to have the size of a kabetza. So let's say, for example, a person was lifted and inside the house was a loaf of bread. There was a loaf of bread. That loaf of bread has got very high level of tumah, of a tumah, because it was in the house of a dead person. Somebody cut the bread into slices and crumbs, and he brings out a small piece of bread, less than a kabetza, and I touch it. Am I tummy or not? I'm not tummy. Is that clear? I am not tummy. Why am I not tummy? Because that's a kabetza. And since the Torah normally we say kazais, but here the Torah changed the expression, so it goes to kazais. It's kabetza. And we see a similar proof to it as Yom Kippur. In one way, on Yom Kippur, the Torah changed its language. The Torah didn't say don't eat, the Torah says don't afflict itself. A person who did not afflict himself, the Torah didn't say a person who ate. A person who didn't afflict himself should get caught. They made the shiur, they changed it from a kazayis to a date. Why do we need a proof from Yom Kippur? Rashi explains the question is that why should a change of expression by tumah need a proof of change of expression by Yom Kippur? Both psukim, both change of expression, both different language. So mechatesi you should need one pasuk to support another pasuk. If you don't have the Gabay Tumas Oichlin, have a said Ocha de Krohu. That's the normal expression of the pasuk. By oichel, it says, "Mikol ma'achol asher yochel." What's the change of expression, by the way? What's the change of expression? It says, from all food that is eaten. That is eaten is extra words. That is not as different as the words as shaloi su'una. As shaloi su'una is a much bigger difference. Says the Gemara, since we see by shaloi su'una that the Torah uses a different expression, al-chachamim gave a different shiur, so also by tumas oichlin. But if the Torah if we want to see the proof of it by Yom Kippur, we would have not said that idea by tumas oichlin, because by tumas oichlin the change is not that significant that you should notice it. Says about tumas oichlin. You know what? I'm going to stop here because I don't want to. We'll go up to that tumas oichlin. We're up to 6, 7 lines from the top and here we're done. Stop 80. Oh, you can all wish Mazel Tov personally. He's speaking now for now, an hour and a half. So. Okay. Any ideas for this? The Sim is next Thursday night to clear all your schedules and everything. Commitment to Mitzvah Shem, hopefully.
We're not doing a barbecue in Nanda. Is that not happening?
Okay.
Barbecue.
Oh, I went to who was it?
Daughter, she loves it.
Some people, I tell you what it is. Sometimes it's a bit like a nice sim. Maybe it's better to wash. It's better to wash. Where we do it here? Do it here.
Just suggest it. Just make it easier.